So we are holding 23b 2 at the words Mechti Oisvinuhu Kolhani Kroi. Just to remind everybody where we're at. For the last two dafim, we've been dealing with the machlokes between Chizki and Rabbi Avu. Chizki has been saying that essentially every time the Torah HaKadosh says the words "you shall not eat," gives a prohibition about not eating. That's all it means. You can't eat. It doesn't have anything to do with benefit. You can still have benefit unless it says the following words: Loi ye ochlu. It shall not be eaten. When the focus is lo ye'ochlu, which is it shall not be eaten, lo ye'ochel, so excuse me, it shall not be eaten means the thing shall not be eaten. That's much more expansive to say it shall not be eaten, nor should anything be brought about where it might come to be eaten, i.e. it's hanging around to have benefit. Any other language that seems to say you shall not eat, it's tied to you, the person, not the food itself. Then it means of lawyer of you shall not eat, it shall not be eaten, etc. It means it shall not be eaten, and you shall not have benefit. And he brought the proof from Nevela. And again, Nevela is an animal that dies, a kosher animal without proper slaughtering or a geish or a tent, and give it away to the stranger that lives with you, does not live with you. Right? Which meant that you could have benefit. Rabbi Yehuda came along, that can't be that. Oh, and the idea being is, you see by Nevela where it says you shall not eat, the Torah went out of its way to say, but you're allowed to have, that's proof that you're not allowed to have benefit. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we learn it out of terefa. A terefa is a kosher animal that you shechted normally. And then after you shechted it, you discover that there's a hole in the lung or whatever. There is an internal injury that meant that if the animal by itself would not have survived the next 12 months. That's a trepa, and you're not allowed to eat it. But the pasuk then comes along, and this is on the bottom of 21b, and the pasuk comes along and says, "Umelekelev tashlichun oisai," but to the dog you shall cast it. So that told us once again by trepa it says you shall not eat, but the Torah goes out of its way to tell us that you're allowed to have benefit by feeding the dog. So only in places where the Torah comes to tell you that you're allowed to have benefit, that's fine. Any other case where it says you shall not eat and the Torah doesn't tell you, that you're allowed to have benefit, when it says you shall not eat, it also means that you shall not have benefit. Finding exceptions to every single rule. Every time we brought a proof that it says you shall not eat, and you could still have benefit. So we said, Rabbi Avu, you hold you're not allowed to have benefit. We said, Shani Hossam. No, here's an exception to the rule of Rabbi Avu. Lochem, to Rumaschem. It says to you, that really belongs to you. So you shall not eat, but you're really allowed to have benefit from it. And every time we had a question on Chizkiel, where it says, Lo ye'ochel, it shall not be eaten. And we said, Chizkiya said, when it says, Lo ye'ochel, it shall not be eaten, it means it shall not be eaten, it shall not have benefit. And we brought a bunch of cases which shows you could have benefit. And again, we brought exceptions. In other words, after two dafim, we have discovered that there is almost no case where in reality, Rabbi Avu and Chizkiya are actually arguing. Because every time you find a place where it doesn't work out for them, it's an exception. And it turns out they constantly are agreeing with each other. Either that you do what he called that it is Asa for Ano or it's not Asa for Ano. So the Gemara right now we were up to on 23b2, Okay, by the word in the left hand corner, in the left hand, the left column in the left hand, mechti. Now let's see. Now that we've challenged Rabavu from all these psukim, all these verses, we said, look, we got verses that show that just because it says you shall not eat, you're still allowed to have benefit. And we answered them all up that these were exceptions to his rule. So in that case, where are they arguing? It turns out that they're actually holding both the same thing. And says the Gemara, so you want to tell me, the chametz b'Pesach, you want these probably difficult. Rabbi Yosi HaGalili. Rabbi Yosi HaGalili held that even though, of course, you're not allowed to eat chametz, he said, what do you call it? You're allowed to have benefit from chametz throughout Pesach. And the Gemara, I believe, on Daf tried to explain this. But Rabbi Yosi HaGalili says, even though you're not allowed to eat chametz, you're allowed to have benefit. The Rabbanan, of course, say, of course not. If you're not allowed to eat chametz, and you're not allowed to have benefit. So you want to say that where they're really arguing is b'chametz b'Pesach ba'aliba d'Rabbanan. And by the case of Bishar Hanisko ba'aliba divrei hakol. The Bishar Hanisko is again an ox that gored somebody and killed somebody that needs to be killed. And how do you kill it? By stoning the animal. And we said if you stone the animal, right, obviously it doesn't have a kosher shechita, which means that you're not allowed to eat it. But im kol zeh, everybody holds that in that case, not only can you not eat it, you cannot have benefit. So now, we said the Gemara now begins to do the explanation. Chizkiya learns in both these cases of chametz b'Pesach, and the shor hanisko, the shor that's stoned, that you cannot eat and you cannot have benefit, because in both cases it says we have the words lo yeh ochel, it shall not be eaten, which is the expansive word to tell us it can't be eaten and we shouldn't have benefit from it. And Rabbi Vu, of course, learns it from his favorite place, Nevela, because by Nevela, the Torah says you shall not eat the Nevela, the dead carcass, but you're allowed to give it away as a present or sell it, right? And here, in these cases of chametz and the shara and the shara niskal, it doesn't say anywhere that you're allowed to have any benefit. By the fact that the Torah doesn't go out of its way to tell us you're not allowed to you're allowed to have benefit, that is proof that when it says you shall not eat, it also means you shall not have benefit. So says the Gemara.
Am I the only one who's having? Is anybody else having trouble with the Zoom?
Yeah, I'm also having. I'm also having connection issues. You fall out often, Yitzchak.
Yeah, Yitzchak, something is off.
Right.
So you've
Okay, so you know what? You know what? Guys, hang on a second. I'm gonna move, and maybe that will be better. Okay, let me move.
Okay.
I'm gonna move myself upstairs. Give me a second. Yeah, I should. Hang on a second. Look at this. Hang on. All right. You guys will let me know as soon as it gets better. Hold on.
Better already.
It's better already. Okay. That's what I thought. Hang on 1 second. Okay. Just give me 1 second. Okay. All right. I'm going to put myself.
I was only afraid that it was only me.
No. Yeah. It's windy here in New York and cold, and that can't be doing good things for the internet. Seriously. Okay, is this much better?
It's right now. It's perfect.
Good. So this we're going to stay. Let me just turn on the lights. Here we go. All right. Here we go. So where were we? Where did you lose me? All the way from the beginning?
No. Just now you were talking about, what's the practical halakhic difference between them?
Right. There is no practical. Very good. There is no practical difference. Mirti, Ben Lamar, Ben Labar, both to Chizkiya. And Rabavu, at the end of the day, we get to Isurim Bahano, that both Chametz and Pesach and the Shor Nisko, not only you're not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to have a benefit. Yes, we get there from two different places. We get there, Chizkiah gets it from the words lo yeyachel. Rav Avul gets it from nevela, that by nevela, the Torah clearly says you're allowed to have benefit, and here it doesn't. It's similar to getting to Boca Raton, flying to West Palm Beach from the north, or Fort Lauderdale from the south. But either way, you get to Boca Raton. So the point is, it's at the end of the day, what's the difference? So Zakti Gemara, we're going to have to find other differences. Ikke benayu is chulin shenichtun ba'azara. Is chulin, non-sacred food, a regular good old food that we put on our table, that by accident was slaughtered in the Azara, inside the Beis Hamikdash's courtyard, which obviously is not allowed to happen. Okay? Is not allowed to happen. Okay? Now, and again, I want to remind everybody just at this point that Rameir is the one that said that what he called the Ravu learns it out of Nevela, and Rabbi Yehuda holds it, we learn it out of Terefa. Okay, so this Gemara right over here is talking from the point of Rabbi Yehuda, that he holds that Rabbi Avu's teaching comes from Terefa, where we say by a Terefa, Lakela Tashlichu Oisai, that even though you're not allowed to eat a Terefa, you're allowed to go ahead and throw it to the dog. And in the words, Lakela Tashlichun Oisai, and to the dog you shall cast it. The word Oisai is extra. All it had to say was Milakela Tashlichun, and to the dog you shall throw. What's Oisai? It. So keeping that in mind, okay, here we go. The difference is good old regular meat that by mistake was slaughtered inside the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, and we're going according to Rabbi Yehuda regarding that about the law of the trade. Chizkiah says, Lo yeyochel, the word Lo yeyochel, mutehani. The word Lo yeyochel, it shall not be eaten, comes to exclude chametz on Pesach and shara nisko. It comes to exclude to say not only can you not eat, you cannot have benefit. And there's no explanation. Oisai, but the word oisai that is written, that is extra by Terefa, which Rabbi Yehuda is learning Rabbi Avu's law, where over there it says, Ubasa basada Terefa loisachelu. You shall not eat the meat of an animal that was torn in the field, that got a Terefa, that got a hole. Milakela tashlichu oisai. To the dog you shall throw it. That word it is extra. So he says like this. And oisai, and that word oisai over there, comes to exclude chulin, regular meat that by accident was slaughtered in the Azara, in the courtyard. In other words, to exclude it from the heter of Terefa, which said by Terefa you're not allowed to eat it, but you're allowed to have benefit. You shall know that chulin shenichtu ba'azara, you're not allowed to have benefit as well as not eat it. And chametz on Pesach and shara niskel, I don't need to come onto that, because by them it already says lo yeyochel, according to Chizkiah. And lo yeyochel always means it shall not be eaten, it shall not be eaten, nor shall it be brought to any place where it might be eaten, i.e. with benefit. Rabbi Avul holds oisai, again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's the extra oisai, like kelatashlechiu oisai. To the dog you shall throw it. The it is extra. Oisai lemeute hani actually is coming to be memayet, to exclude chametz and Pesach and shara nisko, to teach that they not only can you not eat them, but are also usher in benefit. And therefore, chulin shenichtu ba'azara lav di'araisaninu, and the fact that you're not allowed to have benefit from chulin that was slaughtered in the Azara, that is not biblical. On the Torah level, you're allowed to have benefit from it. Rabbinically, you're not, but biblically speaking, you are allowed to have benefit from it. Rabbi Vu says no, since lo yehochel is no different than any other form of you shall not eat, it like everything else, it therefore chametz on Pesach and Shar HaNisko needs to be learned from somewhere, either from Nevela or according to Rabbi Yehuda from the extra word oisai from Terefa. So I need the Terefa extra word to teach me that chametz on Pesach and Shar HaNisko, which since there is no, the Torah does not go out of its way to say you're allowed to have benefit by any of those two. So the oisai comes to tell me that it's not like Terefa and therefore you cannot have benefit, which meant that chulin shenish be'azara has no place to be learned from. Says Rabbi Avu, you're right. Minat Torah, you are allowed to have benefit, and only rabbinically you're not. And obviously Chizkiah says no. Chametz bepesach and Shar HaNisko say lo ye'ochel. To me, says Chizkiah, that is different than every other place in the Torah that says you shouldn't eat, because every other place talks about the person, you shall not eat. Lo ye'ochel says it shall not be eaten. It shall not be eaten means in the food itself, which means that you shouldn't have anything to do with it. It shouldn't have any benefit. So I don't need any place else to teach me about chametz and Shar HaNisko, because I know on my own by the fact that it says lo ye'ochel, it shall not be eaten. I know that it should not be eaten and shall not have any benefit. Therefore, the word oisai, and to the dog you shall throw it, oisai is open to teach us to chulin shenichtu ba'azara. Okay, that's it. Now we're going to keep going along this line for the rest of today, more or less. Yosef Ahu min Rabbanan, there was a certain student, a certain scholar, essentially a certain Talmud. Yosef Ahu min Rabbanan kamei de Reb Shmuel bar Achmeni. And he was sitting and he was talking in the name of what he heard from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. How do I know that all prohibitions in the Torah, when they prohibit from eating, they also mean they also mean to make them also from benefit, to prohibit benefit. So he says, Umaninu. And what case are we talking about? Chametz b'Pesach v'Shar HaNisko. Because every other case for the last two dafim, we kept bringing exceptions to the rule. Lochem to Ramaschem and all that. So the only two that you don't have exceptions for are Chametz b'Pesach and Shar HaNisko. So pray the Gemara. So Rabbi Shmuel ben Achmeni interrupted the student and he said, Minayin, how do we know that when you can't eat, you can't have benefit? Typically, we learn it out like Chizkiah, where it says, it shall not be eaten. When it talks about the chefza itself, the food itself, it means it shall not be eaten and it shall not be benefited from. So the student answered, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, lo ye'ochel isra achila mashmalo, isra no loy mashmalo. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi does not hold like Chizkiah that lo ye'ochel is so expansive. He holds like a Rabbi Vu in this case, that lo ye'ochel means like anything else, you shall not eat, but doesn't tell us anything about benefit. So Frank the Gemara, well, in that case, if you're already leaning towards Rabbi Vu, tepik lein in nevelo. Let's learn it out of nevelo, of the dead carcass, like Rabbi Vu does according to Rab Meir. That over there it says, you shall not eat, but you're allowed to give it away as a gift to the stranger, and you're allowed to go ahead and sell it to the idolater, which says that you're allowed to have benefit. So only in a place where it tells you to have benefit, you're allowed to have benefit. Any other place where it doesn't tell you, you're not allowed to have benefit. And for the Gemara, Savala ki Rabbi Yehuda, the Yehuda, Yeshua ben Levi holds like Rabbi Yehuda, the Oma, Devarim ki Kisabim, that no, you cannot learn out of Nevelo, because Rameya said, when it says over there that you can give it as a gift to the stranger and you have to sell it to the adulterer, that it doesn't mean it's lav dafka. It's interchangeable. You're allowed to sell it to the stranger and give it away to the adulterer. You can give it as a gift to the stranger and sell it to the adulterer. As long as you get rid of it, it doesn't matter how you do it. So therefore, the pasuk is open. It's not coming to tell me anything specific. So it can come to teach me that here only in places where the Torah is clear that you can have benefit is good, but other places where it's not clear, you're not allowed to have benefit. Rabbi Yehuda came along and said, no, Devarim Kikisavim, the Torah, that the Pasuk is coming to teach us an halacha, that Dafka, the stranger among you, you must give it to him as a gift, and the adulterer you must sell it to, and it's not interchangeable. That's why Rabbi Yehuda then said you have to learn it out of Terefa, that Terefa you're allowed to do it. That's why I learned it out of Terefa. So he said, Isa, like Rabbi Yehuda, that you cannot, that Rabbi Avu could not learn it out of Nevela. So let him learn it out from where Rabbi Yehuda learns it out, from Terefa, Milakela Tashlichun Oisai, from the extra word Oisai, that Dafka over here by Terefa, where the Torah comes to tell you you're allowed to throw it to the dog, you're allowed to have benefit, but where the Torah doesn't tell you that you're allowed to have benefit, you're not allowed to have benefit. Zakti Gemara, Kisava, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, he says the prohibition against slaughtering what he called regular meat that was slaughtered in the temple, in the Azara, that means our good old regular meat, that by my mistake was slaughtered inside the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, that is minat Torah. So I need the word oisoi, lakela tashlichun oisoi, I need that to teach me that by chulin shenichtu ba'azara, it's asur b'hana. You're not allowed to have hana. Why? Because it says over here, you shall not eat it, and the Torah does not come and tell us that there's an exception that you're allowed to have benefit, as it does by terefa. So the word oisai by terefa is not open, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, to teach me anything by Chometz Pesach and Shara Nisko, that over there, just because it says you shall not eat, means that you also shall not have benefit. So then the Gemara is having rejected all the obvious situations where Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi might have been able to learn out, what do you call it, that where it says it's also to eat by Chometz and Shara Nisko, that we also means that we shall not have benefits. So says the Gemara Minayin. How do we know? Okay, I'll bring you a different pasuk. Tiksiv, regarding the chatos, the chol chatos sheyuva midama. If you remember, we learned this a couple of days ago. There are two kind of chatoses. There's a chatos chitzoni, a chatos on the outside, and a chatos panini, and a chatos on the inside. The outside meant that the chatos, the sin offering, was offered in the courtyard, and the blood was put onto the Mizbeach Nechayshes. The Mizbeach Nechayshes. Are you guys hearing me, by the way? I just want to make sure that the connection is good. Connection is good? Excellent, good. That the Mizbeach Nechayshes, otherwise known, has two different names. Mizbeach Nechayshes, meaning the tabernacle of copper, or Mizbeach HaChitzai, the outside tabernacle. Either way, it meant the Mizbeach that's outside in the Azara. Inside, there were the inside chatoses, like the chatos, like the sin offerings brought on Yom Kippur, where the blood was sprinkled on the Mizbeach HaPanimi, on the inside Mizbeach, otherwise known as the Mizbeach HaZahav, the golden Mizbeach, the golden tabernacle. What happens if you mess up and you take an outside chatos whose blood was supposed to be put on the outside tabernacle, on the tabernacle made out of copper, and you go ahead and you spritz its blood on the inside, okay, on the Mizbeach Hazov inside the Heichel. Okay, so in other words, the pasuk says like this: any chatos from which some of its blood has been brought to the tent of meeting, that's the Heichel inside, to effect atonement within the holy, shall not be eaten, it shall be burnt on fire. It says, Be'esh tisaref, she'ein talmud lama be'esh tisaref. The pasuk ends the words, Be'esh tisaref. It shall be burnt in fire. She'ein talmud lama be'esh tisaref. It doesn't have to say it. Those words are extra. And the Gemara is going to explain this. Why does it say it shall be burnt in fire if it's not needed for itself? because the ksiv. Now this is the reason why it doesn't have to say, because the pasuk, there's another pasuk in Parashat Shemini in the middle of Sefer Vayikra, which says, "V'hinei sirayv," and behold, it was burnt. It has been burnt. This has been the case. This was the case of we're on the last day of the inauguration of the Mishkan of the tabernacle in the Midbar, in the desert, where Moshe stepped away and Aaron went ahead and burnt it completely. And over there, they learned the halachas that if something is burnt if something is brought in the wrong place, the psukim would come out pretty clearly. We infer from the psukim that if the blood is brought in the wrong place, it needs to be burnt. So since I already have one place where essentially that halacha was taught, I don't need you again to tell me this idea over here straight up. You shall not eat it. It shall lo yochelu. It shall not be eaten. Be'esh tisaref. In a fire, it should be burnt in a fire. So therefore, since this is now extra, because I already have a second place where I've already learned this halacha, when the blood is brought in the wrong place, it may not be eaten and it must be burnt. Tenu inyan l'chol asurim sheb'Torah. So the extra be'esh tisaref, in a fire it shall be burnt, may be used for all prohibitions in the Torah, i.e., chametz on Pesach and shor hanisko, and the ox that needs to be stoned. Now we're on the daf. We're on daf Chav Dalet 24a. Now, with regard to chametz on Pesach and shor hanisko, where I don't need it to teach me that I'm not allowed to eat, because the pasuk comes straight and says, Lo ye'achel, it shall not be eaten, where it says by chametz, it shall not be eaten. By shor hanisko, it says it shall not be eaten. So I don't need be'esh tisaref to tell me you're not allowed to eat. So what do I need the extra be'esh tisaref to use it for? Tenu le'inyan israno. So we now have it available to teach me that where I can't eat it, I'm also now not allowed to have benefit. Now, here comes the problem. If just like over there by chatos, which is where I'm learning this extra word, be'esh tisaref, it teaches us that it must be burnt. Then you're coming to teach me that every place in the Torah where it says it's prohibited to eat, and therefore prohibited to have benefit, I must burn it. Within the holy, within the heichal, inside the Beis Hamikdash, it shall be burnt in the fire. When it's inside the Beis Hamikdash, it's inside the heichal. That has to be burned. The ain't kol isurim sheb'Torah b'sreifa, but not all other isurim, not all the prohibitions of not being able to eat have to be burnt because it's not inside. Good. Now we're up to it. So we've just learned the place where we can learn that chametz and Pesach and shor hanisko could be taught. You're not allowed to have benefit from the extra words be'esh tisaref. Great. We can go on our day. Except here's the problem. Come to Gemara, says Rab Shmuel ben Achmeni to this student. Well, that can't be where Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is learning it. This is not what we're using it for. So we're using it for something else. We need it for what Rab Shimon learned. Titania, Rab Shimon says, it comes to teach us on a chatas that became possible, became invalidated, that it's burnt in the holy. I only thought I would therefore say it's only the chatas that became invalid that needs to be burnt in the in the courtyard, in the Hazara of the Beis Hamikdash. Pesule Kodshe Kadoshim, but the invalid Kodshe Kadoshim offerings, these are the other offerings that were brought on the inside, on the inside Mizbeach, the Mizbeach Hazav, the golden Mizbeach, that were brought on the inside and had to be eaten within the walls. And what most of it was brought on the Mizbeach, was burnt on the Mizbeach, and what was ever left over had to be eaten within the walls of the Beis Hamikdash. The Emure Kochim Kalim, and the sacrificial parts of Kochim Kalim are Shalomim. Shalomim have a lower value, have a lower value. Their food, their leftover meat is allowed to be eaten in all of Yerushalayim. However, the sacrificial parts, the parts of the shlom that have to be burnt on the Mizbeach, were actually also risen to Kodesh Kedoshim because they were put into the holy vessels and carried and put on top of the Mizbeach, and in doing so went up a level to Kodesh Kedoshim. How do I know that if any of these become Tameh, minayin, that they also must be burnt inside in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash? Talmud Loima, v'chol, and any ba'kodesh be'esh tisareh, within the holy shall be burned. So therefore, I need this to teach me a different law, and it's not open to teach me about chametz on Pesach and Shar HaNiskal. It's not available. So once again, just because it says I shall not eat by them, how do I know that I'm not allowed to have benefit from chametz on Pesach and the Shar that was stoned? So we're still stuck. So Amalei, so the student said, the Talmud said to Reb Shua ben Achmeni. So this is where Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi learned it from. Rab Nosson Rabach, Rab Yonason Rabach, Rab Yonason, your Rabbi, Reb Shua ben Achmeni, the Rabach Mahai Kro Kamalei. He learned that you're not allowed to have benefit, you're not allowed to have anah from chametz on Pesach and the Shar HaNiskal from the following pasuk. It says as follows: if there was left over from the basa, from the meat of the inauguration offering, again, this is talking in the middle of when they first inaugurated the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert. So if you left over basa, meat, from the inauguration's offering, or from the bread, if you leave any over bread, it means in the timetable that you have to eat it, the time ran out. What should you do with the leftover? You shall burn the leftover in the fire, and then the pasuk goes. Okay, listen to the way the pasuk goes. You shall burn the leftover in the fire. It shall not be eaten because it's holy. So first it says you shall burn it in the fire, comes first. Obviously, everybody, if it says you shall burn it, it obviously means it shall not be eaten. So the words in the pasuk that say lo ye'ochel, after the words be'eish tisaref, in the fire it should, the left hanoiser, the leftover be'eish tisaref shall be burnt in the fire, and then it says lo ye'ochel ki kodesh, it shall not be eaten because it's holy, is obvious. If it has to be burnt, of course it can't be eaten. So we have extra words in this pasuk. So the Gemara says, she'ein talmud loyma lo ye'ochel. It doesn't need to say it shall not be eaten. It's obvious. Uma talmud loyma lo ye'ochel. So why does it say lo ye'ochel? If ein in legufa, if it's not needed for its own context. In other words, this case of noisa, things being left over, the hakesib, because right before it says lo ye'ochel, it says the following words: V'sarata es hanoisa be'eish, and you shall burn the leftover in the fire. Obviously, if you burn something in a fire, you obviously cannot eat it. So the pasuk doesn't need to tell me you shall not eat it right after it says you shall burn it in the fire. So therefore, it's extra and it's hanging out for something to be learned from it. So then we can apply it to all prohibited items mentioned in the Torah, i.e., chametz b'Pesach and the Shar HaNiskal, because every other case has an exception. And since I don't, and now we're on 24a2. Okay, and since I do not need this to teach me that I'm not allowed to eat, because by chametz b'Pesach and by Shar HaNiskal it says lo ye'ochel, it shall not be eaten, so I know I'm not allowed to eat. To new in Israel, so let the extra word of lo ye'ochel over here by noisa, by leftover food, then let it come to teach me that you're not allowed to have benefit by chametz on Pesach and Shar HaNiskal. Now we got the same problem. And now you're coming to tell me, on ima kam b'sreifa, and just like over here by noisa, you have to burn it. Therefore, I would say that all prohibitions in the Torah I chametz b'Pesach, and shar and niskal need to be burned. You shall burn the leftover. Noisa b'Sereifa. The ankle is surim shabbatayra b'Sereifa, but not all the other anything else in the Torah b'Sereifa. Because the truth of the matter, all it needed to say was v'Sarafta. The whole pasuk was talking about. The whole pasuk was talking about the leftovers, the noiser. So it should have just said v'Sarafta. It shall be burnt. Why does it go out of its way to say es ha-noiser again? The noiser. I know that on my own. The answer is to tell us the burning is only for the noiser. Everything else that we're going to learn out of the other extra words in this pasuk only come to teach us that you're not allowed to have benefit. It doesn't mean that you have to burn it. Great. So now we know we have a place where we learn that chametz on Pesach and shara nisko, the stoned ox. We have a place where we can learn that not only are you not allowed to eat, because in both places it says lo ye'achel, but we also now know a place where you're not allowed to have benefit from the extra words of lo ye'achel that said by noisa, by the leftover food. Great, except no good. Comes Rabbi Shmuel ben Achmeni, he says no good. V'hai lo ye'achel by noisa. Lahachi, who does it? Is it coming for this? No. It's not coming for this. It's coming to teach something about Rabbi Elazar. The Amar Rabbi Elazar, that pasuk of Noisa says ends with the following words: Lo ye'achel ki kodesh. Who? Once again, an extra word. Who? All it had to say is Lo ye'achel. It shall not be eaten ki kodesh, because it's holy. What do you need? Who? It is holy. What else are we talking about? We're talking, the pasuk talking about leftovers. Nicer. I know what you're talking about, right? So what's the extra who? Kol shebe kodesh pasuk. It's telling us any of the holy that is pasuk, anything that's holy that becomes disqualified. Ba'akos of litein loisa say alachilasai is coming to teach us there is also a negative prohibition on tziddik. Because here's the funny part by Noisa. What did Noisa say? By Noisa, it says, "V'sorafta es hanoisa be'esh." You shall burn the leftovers in fire. That's a positive command. You shall take the leftovers and you shall burn it in a fire. That's a positive command. We all know that a positive command is not as terrible as being over on a negative command, on a loisase. If one goes in, according to the first part that said, in the fire it shall be burned. You shall burn it in a fire. Let's say you didn't burn it in a fire. You ate it. If that's all it said, you would have been mevatel and asay. You simply would have gone ahead and you would have been mevatel. You wouldn't have done a mitzvah say, a positive commandment, which has in itself really no punishment. It has no malchus. It doesn't have lashes. Comes the Torah and says, not only am I telling you, you shall burn it in a fire, but if you don't burn it in a fire and you eat it, not only have you been mevatel a mitzvah say, not only have you done away with a positive commandment, but you have broken a prohibition that you shall not eat it. And therefore you do get malchus. You do get lashes. So therefore, clearly this is something very important to learn, which means that it's not open to teach me about chametz on Pesach and shara nisko. So guess what? We're right back in the soup. We're right back in the thing. I still don't have a place where I learn that I'm not allowed to have benefit from chametz and I'm not allowed to have a benefit from a stone ox. So therefore, where am I learning it? We're going back to the case of the Chattas's blood that was brought in the wrong place. The outside Chattas whose blood was brought in the inside Chattas. And the Eipach, we're going to switch its reasoning. If you remember before we learned it out, it says, Lo ye'achel, you shall not eat. In the fire, it should be be'esh tisaref. We said we don't need the word be'esh tisaref because we learned that somewhere else by Moshe Rabbeinu, who taught that halacha at the inauguration. Comes over here, Abai says, let's flip it around. In fact, it goes the other way. We need be'esh tisaref, and lo yachel chametz is going to be lo ye'achel is going to be open. The Eipach. it says, Be'esh Tisareh. Let the Torah write only the words, it shall be burnt in fire, and you shall not need, it shall not be eaten. You don't need it. Why? Because why does it say loy seyachel in eino le'inyan gufa? Because if I don't need it for itself, how come I don't need it for itself? Because we could just learn it out from what Rabbi Elazar, which we just learned, that anything that's holy that becomes pasul, right? That becomes, that what he called it has a lot to it. What did Rabbi Elazar said? Lo yeyachel ki kodesh kol b'kodesh pasul. Anything that is holy that is disqualified comes to add a prohibition against eating on its eating. Therefore, we already have over here this we're dealing with the chatos. The chatos is holy. If we blew it and put its blood on the inside when we were supposed to put it on the mizbeach chachitza and on the copper and the outside in the courtyard, and we put it on the gold mizbeach on the inside. So what do? We just disqualified it. Rabbi Elazar said, I already learned from Noisar, from leftovers, from its extra words, that any psule mikdashim has an isser, has a lav, a negative, a negative prohibition against eating. So therefore, I don't need the word loisayachel over here in this case as well, in these psukim as well. In that case, let me go apply it to other isurim shebetorah, i.e., chametz and Pesach, and the ox that was stoned. Because every other case in the Torah where it says you should not eat, we found exceptions over the last 3 dafim. And if I don't need it for achila, because each one of these actually say the words lo yeyachel, it says lo yeyachel chametz, lo yeyachel by the shara niskol. So I know it on its own that you're not allowed to eat. To new inyan the isra no. Therefore, it's open for me to learn it that these things are not allowed to have benefit. But now we're going to get the same thing. If the source, which is the schatos over here, whose blood was brought inside the heichal, just like that must be burnt, then I would say the chametz and Pesach and the shar haniskal also have to be burnt. Remember, it's only a few rabbanim that say that you must burn the chametz. Everybody else says all you have to do is dispose the chametz. You don't actually have to burn the chametz. Amakra ha-noiser, extra word, ha-noiser. And you, in other words, it said once again, if you remember what it said over there by noiser, it said v'sorafta es ha-noiser be'esh. It didn't have to say that. Remember, all it needed to say was v'soraft, and it should be burnt. We know, and I'll know on my own it's noiser because that's what's talking about in the pasuk. So the words es ha-noiser be'esh are extra. So therefore, Omakra hanoisa b'sreifa ve'ekol asum shebetorah b'sreifa. So very good. So now we've got a place where I can learn out about chametz b'pesach and shora nisko, that it can have benefit. Amalei rapapala ba'ya ve'emel lechude lehule lav legufe hudasa. But say that the pasuk in Shema is coming to assign a negative commandment to the chatas for itself. In other words, maybe it's coming to teach me also that over here it has an additional prohibition. Where the Torah is so upset about you putting the blood in the wrong place that not only is it going to give you the general prohibition that we learned out of Noisa from leftovers, that that a kid to put a general prohibition against eating. This is coming to put a specific of another lav on this chatas that was brought in the wrong place. Specific. Why? The imi Rabbi Elazar, because Rabbi Elazar says, you want to learn it out of Rabbi Elazar, that Rabbi Elazar says there's an isser, a klolius, a generalized isser of that you shall not eat, that we learned out in Noisa. There's a problem. Ein loikil in our lab shabiklolius. We have a rule that when you learn that there's a generalized prohibition, we do not give lashes. We do not give malchus. We only give malchus when the Torah specifically says on a specific avera, this gets malchus. right? You can only get malchus on a specific aver. So maybe over here, what's coming over here is to say not only is there a general prohibition against eating, but there's also a specific prohibition against eating, and therefore you should get, to teach us you should get malchus, which means it's not open to teach us. It's not open to teach us about chametz on Pesach and the Shara Nisko. El Omer Papa. Now we're on 24A3. El Omer Papa Mehacha. We're going to learn about chametz on Pesach and the Shara Nisko from here. Va'abasa. This is concerning sacrificial parts. We're talking about Kodesh. We're talking about over here. We're talking about Kodesh Kedoshim, Psuli Kodesh Kedoshim that become Tameh. And flesh, holy flesh, that somehow touches something that is tameh, touches something that is already tameh, so yisoref. In a fire, you shall burn it. You do not have to say in this pasuk, it shall not be eaten. Because I don't need to say it. Why don't I need to say it? Because you can learn it out of a kal v'chomer for Tori argument from Maisa Kal, from the easy Maisa. What's the easy Maisa? For an example, like Maisa Sheni or Maisa Oni, which are allowed to be eaten in all of Yerushalayim. They don't have to specifically be eaten within the walls of the Harabayas of the Holy Mountain, within the walls of the Beis Hamikdash. It doesn't need to be eaten in there. So they're weaker. You're allowed to eat the mice. They're weaker. They're lenient term mice that are allowed to be all throughout Yerushalayim. Uma Maisa Kal, just like the easy mice. Let's call it Maisa Sheni. Okay? The Amra Torah. I did not consume it in a state of tumah, which means that you're not allowed to eat them, even though they are weaker, because normally they're allowed to be eaten throughout the entire city of Yerushalayim. Basa Kodesh Chamor, Basa Kodesh is therefore got to be more stringent, because it has greater sanctity, because it's only could be eaten where? Within the walls of the Beis Hamikdash, within the walls of the Harabayas. Like Kolshkein, of course, you cannot eat it if it's tameh. So therefore, I don't need a pasuk to teach me that what do you call loyal, that I'm not allowed to eat holy basa kodesh that got tameh. If madach maisa hakal, maisa sheni, which becomes tameh, I'm not allowed to eat. Therefore, of course, holy meat, which I'm only allowed to eat inside the Beis Hamikdash, like kol shekain, that if it's tameh, I cannot eat. So therefore, it's open to teach me something else. If you're going to say, wait a minute, stop. A mazirin minadin. The reason why it has to say it is because we do not establish a prohibition in order to get lashes from a kal v'chomer, from a fortori argument. It's very nice that these arguments are great, they're perfect. But at the end of the day, it doesn't say straight out in the Torah. And if it doesn't say straight out in the Torah, we're not giving malchus, we're not giving lashes. Hekeshu. But I'm going to say no, because we have another thing where we learn from an analogy. Now, an analogy, a hekesh, is much more powerful, because an analogy, when the Gemara brings a hekesh, an analogy, that's a hekesh that comes all the way from halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It comes from Moses on the mountain. Because a hekesh cannot, comparisons, analogies in the Torah have to have tradition. Tradition, as the song goes in Fiddler on the Roof. It has to have a Messiah. On its own, we cannot make analogies. We can make kal v'chomer for Torah arguments, but we cannot make analogies unless there's a tradition that comes all the way back, which means, by the way, by the time we hit the Mishnah, there were no new analogies made. So, Hekeshu, we have in Hekesh. Diksiv, because it says, okay, you may not eat in your cities outside of Yerushalayim. The tithes of your grains and your oil and your wine and the firstborn of your cattle, okay, and all of your nedavos. That means you made a promise to bring an offering in Yerushalayim. Okay, so you see over here, there's an analogy. The pasuk over here is comparing Maisa de Gancha, right? Your tithes, which we said are the Maisa of the tithes, which are kal, are lenient because you're allowed to eat them you're allowed to eat them all over Yerushalayim. It compares them to your nedavos, your vow offerings, which could only be eaten within and had to be brought only within the Beis Hamikdash. So now there is a hekish, a comparison within a pasuk between holy stuff that has to be brought in the Beis Hamikdash and Maisa, which can be outside of the Beis Hamikdash. So now that I've got this comparison, clearly I can then say if there's a hekish between them, I can certainly could compare Tomei Maisa to Tomei Basa Kodesh. So just like Maisa, I'm not allowed to eat. So certainly the Tomei Maisa, I'm not allowed to eat, even though I'm allowed to eat it anywhere. I'm certainly not allowed to eat holy meat that I'm only allowed to eat within the walls of the Beis Hamikdash if they're Tomei. I can learn out that for Torah argument that Kabbalah argument because there's a hekish, there's a pasuk that clearly compares within one pasuk Meiser to Nidavos, which are holy offerings. So once the Torah says there is a connection, now I can already take a connection to its logical conclusion. If that's the case, so therefore matam lo yochel. So once again back, therefore the word lo yochel is now open. In I don't need it for itself. Let me apply this lo yochel to all prohibitions in the Torah, i.e. chametz on Pesach, and again the shar on nisko, because all other cases we always found exceptions. I don't need it for achila because of course it says lo yochel straight out by chametz, and it says it by shara nisko. Let's apply it to ano. But now you can tell me just like over here by the tomei offerings. By the offerings that got tomei, they were eliminated through burning. We're now on number 4 on 24a. Afkol isum shebetayr b'sreifa. So too, all these surim chametz and pesach and shara nisko need to be burned. Omicron. Now we can go all the way back to hanoiser. It had an extra word to tell us, but not sorev. It should be burned. B'sarafta esanoiser. The noiser should be burned. The extra word esanoiser. Hanoiser b'sreifa. Men kol isum shebetayr b'sreifa. Says the Gemara. 1 minute. Amalei Ravina l'Ravashi ve'ema laver alo b'shnei lavin. Maybe it's coming to tell us that by tomatikal offerings we're coming to bring 2 lavim. That you should in fact get 80 lashes. Lav mi Omer Abaye, didn't Abaye say, Oichel petusia loika arba. If you eat a small non-kosher herring, let's say, you incur 4 sets of lashes, for he has violated 2 prohibitions against eating all types of sharotzim. There's 2 psukim, I'm not going to go into them, but if you have the art scroll, you can find these in Numbers 37 and 38, where they go through all the psukim, only because we're running late. Right, but over here there are 2 psukim that clearly say you're not allowed to eat to all types of creepy crawlies, and there's also 2 additional prohibitions against eating specifically fish-like species, aquatic species. So we've got 4. So you actually get 40 times 4. You get 160 lashes. Nimola, if you eat an ant like a chamisha, you got the 2 of eating a sheretz, and you got 3 regarding land varieties. So there are actually 5 lavim. So you get over 200 lashes. And guess what? Oh, now we're on top of 24b. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm motoring along here just to get us to a spot here. Tsaria like a sheish. And a hornet, a flying insect, you actually get 6 sets of lashes. So you see that the Torah goes out of its way to give extra lashes. So who says the lo yochel over here by Basa Tomei is open to teach me for chametz on Pesach that it's not allowed to have a no, and shara nisko that it can't have a no. Maybe it's coming to add extra lashes, extra malchus on the case of Tomadika Basa. Says the Gemara, Amalei. This is an unbelievable, important halach in Shas. Any time where it's possible to derive a new law from a pasuk, we go ahead and do it. We darshan, and we don't add more negatives. We're not looking to make our lives more difficult. Why are we looking to try to find more smacks, more lashes, less lashes? And I'd rather go learn out a different, a different limud entirely, which teaches us a maridika thing. When you ask a Rav a question in halacha, his first, the easy answer is to say, oh, it's no good. That's not the kind of Rav you're supposed to look for. You're supposed to look for a Rav whose first instinct is, let me find out how I can make this happen, how I can make this work out. Let me see in the halacha, is there a way to make this work? There's a famous Rav here in Borough Park, the Kallisberger Rav, who is a truly great genius. As a 20-year-old, was a member of the Bezdin of Satmar. He is well known that in Shilas of Maris, of blood, that he always looks for ways. He always looks for ways to try to make sure that it's good, not that it's no good. He's famous for this. My own rabbis, who were Litvisher rabbis, sent me, Rabelsky, my Rebbe, Olav Shalom, sent me to the Kallisberger Rav, he sent me to him, because he said he's the one to paskin the Shilas. This is what he said. So the famous joke with him is, he was once getting a ride with somebody in the car, and they got to a red light, and the car stopped. So he picked his eyes up and said, McCann Gain, you can keep moving. Right? Because that's the way, that was the line that was associated with him. Because this law right here, we're not looking for additional prohibitions. That's not the idea. The Torah is a plus, not a minus. Okay, I know it's 9:00. Is everybody okay if we go on for a few more minutes, or you want to close it down over here? I'd like to move a little further down. Every fingers, ups or downs. Jeff, okay, we got a bunch of fingers. Jerry, I'm assuming you're an up. Okay, very good. So here we go. So the Gemara now says like this. So now we found it. We're done. We did it. We found from Basa Tomei that there's an extra word of Lo Yochel, and now we learned that Chametz on Pesach, it's also Ba'ano, you're not allowed to benefit. And Sharon Niskol, it's also Ba'ano, you're not allowed to benefit. Great. But now that we're already here and we're so happy with Rav Papa, let's break apart what he just taught us. So we're going into Chulin. We're actually going into we're going to go into Kabbanis and stuff, all other stuff. So it says the Basa Ba'bosa Sheyiga B'chol Tamei Lo Yoechel Dershina Lomali. Why do I need, at the beginning of the verse, and the flesh that touches any contaminated thing shall not be eaten? Remember, the flesh is touching the tummy. Not that the flesh was tummy and the person was tar, or let's say, but the flesh touches something that's tummy. To teach us to include wood and frankincense. We had this before. The wood is not food. The wood that goes to burn the fire on the Mizbeach is not food. The frankincense that's burned together with the ketores, right, with the incense, is not food. Now, if it's not food, the reality is it can't become tameh. Only food can become tameh. But we have a hekesh, since it's being compared to food. Since it's being compared to food in its holiness, just like food can become tameh, so we say that eitz and lavani can also become tameh, and the reason for this is something we learned before. The endearment in which holy things are held makes them tameh. If you look at number 5 in the art scroll, it has the exact words, and they're important. The beloved, the endearment of these things, of these holiness, they themselves bring them up to a precious thing that they now can become tameh. So it says the pasuk ba'bosa kol tov yoichal basa the sefer lomali ba'bosa kol tov. Why do I need the end of the pasuk to teach me then that uncontaminated flesh, pure flesh, that any uncontaminated person, any Torah-dika person may eat it? Obviously, you're allowed to. So it says the Gemara l'rabbeis emurim, that comes to include sacrificial parts that became tamei in the first part that teaches that anybody who does eat them gets lashes. That does get lashes. And the reason why you needed to learn it from here, and you can't learn it from the other places where we learned before, is because a murin are never allowed to be eaten by anybody. Even bitohar, think about it. Even when the kohen is pure, is not tamei, a murin must be burnt completely on the mizbeach. So nobody is ever allowed to do it. So the reality is there's no difference between the kohen being tahar and the kohen being tamei. Either way, you cannot eat it because it must be burnt on the mizbeach. Since it must be burnt on the mizbeach, even when the kohen is tar, a murim are not eaten. I might think that if you go ahead and you were tamei and you ate it, it's no worse than when you were tar and you ate it. Comes the Gemara, comes the Torah to tell us, no, you're right, you weren't allowed to eat it when you were tar. But if you eat it when you were tamei, guess what? You got a secondary problem. You got another problem. Okay? You got another set of lashes. So it's up to Gemara. Do we learn this from here? No, we learn it from here. The Tanya and a person who eats flesh from the shlomim sacrifice, that is to Hashem, while his tumah is upon him, that soul shall be cut off from his people. That soul should get chorus. L'Rabbi says amurim, that those extra words, okay, those extra words, that is to Hashem. The pasuk didn't need to say that. The pasuk just needed to say, "Va'nefesh shetoichal bosam mizbeach hashlomim yivnikrasa hanefesh me'ameha." What's Ashel Hashem? If it's a shlomim, I know it's for Hashem. Therefore, the Hashem is coming to teach me that the sacrificial parts are also part of the chorus of this pasuk. So says the Gemara, we're on 24:2. Hosam tumas haguf b'chorus. There we're talking about the person is tamei. The person's guf is tamei. Hacha b'tumas basa b'lav. Here we're talking about when the meat is tamei. The person was tar and the meat was tamei, and the person ate the tamei meat. That person only gets only over on a lav and gets malchus. He doesn't get chorus. Chorus is only when the meat was tar and the person who was tamei ate it. Okay, we're up to over here. I think we're going to stop right over here by Amar Rabbi Vu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. I know we're a little high up on the Amid, but hopefully tomorrow we should be able to pick up a little more speed. I didn't do tomorrow's stuff, but I think it's a little easier than today's stuff. All right, very good, guys. Have a great day.